Tonight's presentation is called Exploring Everyday Life During the Battles of Saratoga, and it's given by Ann Clothier.
She earned her Bachelor of Science degree in History at the College of Oneonta. While attending the Cooperstown Graduate Program in Museum Studies, she gained experience working on projects at the Farmers Museum, Fenimore Art Museum, and New York State Historical Association. She worked as Director of Education at the Saratoga County History Center at Brookside Museum for over a decade before becoming assistant to the Saratoga County History in 2024. So on behalf of the Knights of Columbus, we're very happy to introduce our speaker tonight, Ann Clothier.
Thank you so much. All right, so I just wanted to check and see if sound is okay and working all right. Excellent. I want to thank you for inviting me here this evening, and we definitely have been hard at work for a lot longer than people expect here in Saratoga County to prepare for, as someone just a couple of minutes ago said, big doings in 2027. So we are really working hard to get the word out and make people aware of what happened right here in our own backyard in Saratoga County when it comes to the battles of Saratoga. Now, nationally, a lot of the focus is on next year, 2026. And while we are certainly going to be doing plenty of things for that, again, our big time to shine is going to be October of 2027. So toward the end this evening, I do have some preview of some of our upcoming events and information on how to become involved and where to follow us and find all of that out. But I also have information about the campaign, the battles, the surrender, and all of that. And then also going to talk some about the everyday experiences and some of the accoutrements that the American soldiers, the militiamen, would have with them. And I have been warned that we are on a little bit of a time clock tonight because for those of you who are watching PBS every night, at 8 o'clock, yes, this week has been the premiere of Ken Burns' his series, The American Revolution. And if you are late to the party, it is okay. It is available. It is free on PBS on their website, so you can certainly catch up. But tonight is the third episode. So I've been warned that if I talk for too long, people might get up and walk out. So I'm going to try and keep things concise, all right? So, who here has been watching the Ken Burns series? Excellent, all right. And maybe we'll inspire some more to sign on and start watching as well. Now, all right, so we're again focusing on what was happening in the summer and the fall of 1777. And so this map here, again, shows this, this region, upstate New York and some of New England, and gives us an idea, a little bit of the terrain, and again, where also some of the population centers were, the waterways. Waterways incredibly important at this era in particular when it comes to warfare and transportation. And if we then forward to the next map, a more modern map and rendering, we can see that these waterways are what was being followed for these campaigns and all of this military activity that was happening here in upstate New York, again, over the summer and into the fall of 1777. And we do have a very brief, incomplete sort of timeline over here that I won't go through in detail right now, but we can give a quick start here that June 17th is when Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne, the general for the British Army, departs from Canada. And so that campaign coming down through the Champlain Valley is really what, again, kicks off the events that will lead to everything happening around Saratoga, modern-day Schuylerville, Stillwater, all of that. And all of these little sort of yellow explosions are different skirmishes and battles that happen along the way. And so as we move on through some of the overview, you will probably recognize some other names as well. So Burgoyne has a pretty good start. Things go really well. He is traveling on Lake Champlain, lots of bateaux and boats. It's going very smoothly. And so he gets to Fort Ticonderoga, which is staffed by an American force, and they're not really all that prepared. And so the Americans, they give up the fort. And this is something that General Philip Schuyler, who was in charge of the Northern Department at that time, is blamed for. And it's really unfair that he has been blamed for this, because looking back retrospectively, we can see that the decision to give up Fort Ticonderoga was the best decision that could be made under those circumstances. And because if the Americans, with their unprepared and much smaller numbered force, had tried to put up a resistance to the British Army, they would have been decimated. And because they retreated, they lived to fight another day. And for many of those soldiers, that other day came at the battles of Saratoga. So if that strategic decision hadn't been made the way it was, Saratoga might have gone differently. Now, Schuyler, again, he's blamed for this. Congress actually essentially demotes him as a result of the loss of Fort Ticonderoga. But Schuyler is still very much involved. And another thing that he does that is incredibly strategic, with a lot of foresight, he knows that the further he can get Burgoyne away from his supply lines, and the slower he can make Burgoyne's British Army move, the more they will be stretched thin. So what Schuyler does is he orders the militia to begin putting up some barriers, shall we say. And here we have Philip Schuyler, who, again, was responsible for some of these strategic decisions. Mr. Wild Hair Don't Care here. It's interesting, so many of the other founders and such, they have these very carefully coiffed wigs and things like that. He's always depicted with this, so hey, good for him. Yes. And so something that I found a really good quote from the author Richard Ketchum, who did a book on the battles of Saratoga. In talking about these militiamen and what they were encouraged to do, he says, "A man who had cleared acres of forest to create a farmstead, who had built his own home out of timber he cut and hewed, and whose sole source of heat in winter comes from his stack of firewood, gets to be uncommonly handy with an axe. And when hundreds of such fellows are put to work at what they do best, the results are likely to be prodigious, as the British and Germans were about to learn." So all these militiamen were ordered to start cutting down trees. And so they are creating swamps, they're damming up creeks, and they are turning what had been a tolerably serviceable road into an absolute mud pit. Now, Burgoyne's army, we have to remember at this point in time, you've got a mobile city trying to move through the wilderness. You've got, and again, it depends on which date we're talking about, before or after which battles, but you've got roughly 9,000 people attempting to steamroll through the eastern Adirondacks. And when these militiamen have cut down those trees and dammed up those creeks and turned it all to mud, they're slowed down and they are only making 1 mile a day for nearly a month. So once again, strategy. Schuyler had it figured out in this case, and he slowed them down. So for something like in 24 days, they only made it 25 miles. And an army moves, travels, exists on their stomachs. And so, again, those supply lines from up in Canada are having a harder and harder time getting to the Army. So there are definitely some other things, shall we say, side quests that happen along the way. We have the battles of Hubbardton. We have battles at Fort Anne, even a small one at Kingsbury. We have Bennington. So all of these things are starting to weaken Burgoyne's army, because even if the army technically won, the British army won, they're losing troops, they're losing supplies, they're losing horses, there are prisoners taken. All of these things, again, are costing Burgoyne dearly. So, again, very quick glossing over battles and skirmishes that can and are their own programs sometimes. But again, in the interest of time. So we are moving forward now to what is happening right down right by the Hudson, and we have the Battle of Freeman's Farm. And so this is something that happens, and so Burgoyne's army and the growing American force encounter each other. And it is technically a British victory because the British hold the field. However, they lose more troops than the Americans, and they get stuck. They can't really, they're not moving, and they're starting to become surrounded. And so this is what's happening on September 19th. Now, again, they're stuck, they're surrounded. So then we have October 7th. And here's again some more maps and such that were done in the 1770s showing these locations and such. And this is a really interesting quote that I've always loved from Major Henry Dearborn. And he wrote, "Now about 2:00 p.m., when a heavy fire commenced on both sides, which continued until dark, the enemy brought almost their whole force against us. But we, who had something more at stake than fighting for 6 pence per day, kept our ground till night. The loss of those brave men are very greatly lamented in the army. But as it was a debt that they and every one owe their country, I believe they paid it with cheerfulness." So, something more at stake than fighting for 6 pence a day. A reference to what the British soldiers were earning as their role as soldiers in the army. And so the outcome, again, of Freeman's Farm, the First Battle of Saratoga, is very rough for the British. And I actually made a note earlier to be able to tell you exactly what those casualties were. So for Freeman's Farm, the Americans lost 323, roughly, while the British, including their German allies, American loyalists or royalists, and French Canadians, they suffer casualties of 591. So, and now again, October 7th, we come to that, and yet another horrific battle, incredibly violent, and this is where this guy has his time to shine. Now, who is this? Okay, good. I usually have a chorus of George Washington. I'm impressed. Nicely done. But yes, this is Benedict Arnold. And he leads the charge. And there's been a lot of debate over the years about whether he did it against orders and if he had been sequestered into his quarters and all these different things. And it doesn't seem that it was necessarily the case, but pretty much everyone agrees that what he did was brave, rash, heroic, but he rallied troops at an absolutely pivotal point in the battle. And as a result, he ended up with a wound to his leg that nearly cost him his leg, and the pain of which plagued him for the rest of his life. And so, but if that musket ball, if that little piece of lead had gone just a couple of inches one way or another, if this had caught him in the torso, if this had caught him in the femoral artery, if this had gotten him so injured that he was mortally wounded and he died on that day, we would have Arnold County, Arnold Lake, Arnoldstown, all different things named after Benedict Arnold, the way we have Washington's name on all sorts of things and various other heroes of the American Revolution. He would be the martyr of Saratoga. But he's not, because of what happened a few years later. However, again, at the time of the battles of Saratoga, he is recognized as being a linchpin. And at the battlefield, now who here has been to the battlefield? Saratoga National Historical Park. Excellent. I love to see all those hands. You have the boot monument. It's a stone monument of a boot. And it doesn't have any names on the monument itself, but it is honoring what he did there, what he sacrificed there. And then at the Saratoga Monument, the giant obelisk, you have the empty niche, which should have held his statue the way it holds the statues of Gates and the others. But it's left empty. So I find it interesting the way that he has been acknowledged and quietly honored. Because again, his later actions of turning coat did put American lives at risk. It did endanger the American army. It did endanger the officers. It endangered Washington. It was definitely something very destructive to the American forces. But again, it doesn't necessarily erase what he had done at Saratoga. Now, while Arnold did live to fight another day, on the British side, we have one of only two British generals during the American Revolution who fell on the field. And this is General Simon Fraser, who was a very high-ranking officer under Burgoyne. And he is killed, and there's all these stories. Morgan's rifleman, Timothy Murphy, having made the shot. Again, really hard to substantiate who fired exactly which shot. There's definitely people who strongly advocate for the Timothy Murphy story, but either way, Simon Fraser ends up mortally wounded and dies the next morning. Now, because he had made, because he was able to linger, he was alive and relatively conscious overnight, he actually made a request about where he wanted to be buried and when. And Burgoyne honored this. Now, again, looking back, this delayed Burgoyne's movements, and it allowed the Americans to even further surround Burgoyne, because we see in this image here, this is an engraving showing the British camps on the west side of the Hudson in essentially the day after the Second Battle of Saratoga. So this is depicting October 8th. We can even roughly tell you what time of day it is depicting. It is the early evening, because they have included in this image Fraser's burial party working their way up the hill to where he had requested to be buried. And it's an amazing image, and it's based upon sketches done by a British officer, and that were later submitted to an artist to be turned into this engraving and included in a book. But it gives us an idea, a hint at least, of some of the things that you would have seen if you were standing right near the Hudson, right around Stillwater, and on October 8th, on that evening in 1777. You see the tents. You also see some of these buildings here. Now, these buildings are the structures that local farmers had built, because another thing that's often forgotten, what is now today Saratoga Battlefield, much of that land, it was farms. Even the very names of the battles, the Battle of Freeman's Farm, the Battle of Barber's Wheat Field, tell us that there were people there who were farming, who were growing food, who were raising livestock. And we can see a hint, again, of those structures that they had built. And we also know that the soldiers were sometimes taking apart those structures and the fences and using those to build huts or for firewood. Sometimes these structures were being taken over as hospitals. Sometimes they were being taken over as headquarters. In fact, if we go back to our friend Benedict there, those of you who have visited the battlefield, stop too. That's where the Nielsen farm, once again, another farm, that little red farmhouse on the hill, that was the headquarters for Benedict Arnold and Poor, so two officers for the American side. So these structures were being commandeered. But again, I absolutely love this image for everything it can show us. Last but not least, right over here, another great detail, the bridge of boats that Burgoyne had set up to be able to transport troops and supplies back and forth across the river very easily. So, Burgoyne and the British Army, their German allies, they're all pretty much surrounded because the American forces have grown exponentially, and they continue to do so. There are troops pouring in from all over the place. And so Burgoyne starts mulling what to do. And so between October 7th, that date of the second battle, and the surrender, which happens on October 17th, there is a siege. The Americans are harassing and picking at the British and trying to convince them that it's time. There's nothing else they can do. And so that is when we end up with a scene that looked maybe something like this. Granted, again, this is a painting that was done actually in 1822 by John Trumbull, and it does hang in the rotunda of the Capitol, which gives us an idea of its national significance. This event that, again, happened right in our backyard. And here we see General Burgoyne. We see General Gates here preparing to accept, and in this case, return the sword, but accept this idea of surrender. And this is the first time that a British field army lays down its arms and surrenders. And it happens right here. Now, as a bit of preparation for this quote, there has been a change in terminology definition over the years. You'll know it when we get to it. The voice of fame, ere this reaches you, will tell you how greatly fortunate we have been in this department. Burgoyne and his whole army have laid down arms and surrendered themselves to me and my Yankees. Thanks to the giver of all victory for this triumphant success, Major General Phillips, who wrote me that saucy note last year from St. John's, is now my prisoner. With Lord Petersham, Major Ackland, son of Sir Thomas, and his lady, daughter of Lord Ilchester, sister to the famous Lady Susan, and about a dozen members of Parliament, Scotch lords, etc. If old England is not by this lesson taught humility, then she is an obstinate old slut, bent upon her ruin. General Horatio Gates, October 20th, 1777. Now, that word, at that time, meant an old dog. Anyway, I find it an interesting quote, and Gates, I believe this is a letter to his wife, is really relishing this, especially Phillips, who wrote me that saucy note last year. So this is, he's taking this time to say, we did it. Now, as we turn our attention to the idea of the everyday life for the soldiers, we can talk about a little bit about what they would have been seeing, what they would have been doing, and all of that. The tents, the places where they would be staying, we can see some examples of right here. I'm going to be using a lot of images from different reenactments that we've been doing in, again, the lead up to 2027. And these tents were a pretty good case scenario. Best case scenario, there's structures. There's a farmer's barn or a house that you get to stay in. But these are a pretty good option too. Worst case scenario, you're wrapped up in a blanket, maybe huddled under a tree if you're lucky, kind of thing. So depending on all sorts of circumstances, if you have been sent ahead on scout, if the baggage wagons are too far behind, you didn't always have this as an option for where to stay. Now, of course, the question always is, what's for dinner? Well, you had a lot of preserved meats, especially salt pork. And so, salt pork, not that pleasant. It's not my favorite by any means. And they would often try to find different ways of making it more palatable. And so it would often be soaked. It might be, to get some of that salt out, it might be cooked over a fire. They sometimes would actually take shovels and use the shovels essentially as a kind of frying pan over the fire to sear the meat and things like that. Another option, because necessity is the mother of invention, they would sometimes take barrel staves, those strips of thin metal that go around barrels, and often flour and things like that would be shipped to the armies from the quartermasters and such in barrels. Well, if they could get their hands on a barrel, those thin metal strips, they would take those off and they would coil them up. And that turns into a handy little sort of grill that you could put over the fire and put your meat on that, kind of like a trivet or a grill. And that's actually been found archaeologically at Saratoga National Historical Park, and I believe Fort Ticonderoga and other places where these soldiers were spending a lot of time. And you've also got different types of grains and such. You have a lot of rice, you've got barley, you have dried beans, dried peas, but you're also foraging. And so you could supplement your diet in a variety of ways. Now, one of those ways, they did have sutlers. These were merchants that traveled around and followed the army, and you could go to a sutler and buy alcohol. You could buy more butter. You could buy chocolate even. There were also, again, other ways to supplement. If you happened to be encamped on one of those farms, and those poor farmers, back in the spring, had planted potatoes, you would have a feast. And we know from a variety of sources that the soldiers on both sides really liked their potatoes. And one of these references, actually, is a letter that from Philip Schuyler's secretary writing to Philip and talking about Philip's wife, Catherine. Now this letter, this is referring to the American soldiers who are now at Schuyler's mansion guarding some of the prisoners of war. The riflemen and light infantry being encamped on the hill back of the house render the tenure on which the potatoes are held exceedingly precarious. Mrs. Schuyler has detained the servants for the purpose of securing them. The servants will be sent up tomorrow. Your fencing on the hill is mostly appropriated by the troops and applied to sheltering them, and all that can be obtained from the officers is a promise that they will not suffer the materials to be burned or destroyed. General Burgoyne's suite and visitors have entirely discomposed the economy of the family and have given no small degree of trouble to Mrs. Schuyler. They intend to stay till Wednesday. Now, this is an interesting sort of footnote after the surrender at Saratoga. Philip Schuyler, once again, that very strategic mind, he decides that he is going to host General Burgoyne and some of his highest-ranking officers at his home in Albany, the place that is now known as Schuyler Mansion State Historic Site. Now, this is incredibly interesting development because Burgoyne, just days before, had ordered his troops to set fire to Schuyler's summer home, what now we think of as the Schuyler House. That house does date back to 1777, November of 1777, because it was rebuilt. The earlier home that had been there, Burgoyne ordered destroyed. So again, Philip Schuyler says, I'm going to host Burgoyne and some of his officers and their wives, and I can just imagine the correspondence or the conversation between Philip and Catherine, because Philip's still up around Schuylerville, modern-day Schuylerville, Saratoga, Stillwater area, and Catherine is left to be the hostess with the mostess, and have given no small degree of trouble to Mrs. Schuyler. So she's not having a good time. And John Lansing, again, that secretary to Schuyler, is maybe giving him a heads up. But again, and that idea of entirely discompose the economy of the family. There's a few different ways we can translate that. At the very least, they have drank all the claret. So, but I love this quote because it gives us so much information in just a few lines. Now, as for what they wore, we have a lot of really dedicated living historians, historical interpreters, reenactors, whatever you'd like to call us, living in this area. And so there's a lot of work that is put into getting the clothing just right. And I have some examples over here. I was able to raid my friend's closet. And so he has put a lot of work into this, and this shirt is entirely hand-stitched. That is a good observation. He's only about 6 foot tall, but the shirts actually were intended to be, and intentionally, quite long, because by looping up the lower tails of the shirt, that's your underwear. And it is also protecting everything from the breeches that might have uncomfortable inner seams and things like that. So these shirts here are something that the soldiers would be wearing, and ideally they'd have at least an extra shirt or two with them, because it was really, really important that these soldiers were having laundry done. And this was a task that women were doing. Now, camp followers have gotten a bad rap, reputation-wise, over the years. All sorts of rumors about exactly what they were doing over there in those tents. Now, for the most part, you can't, and again, we can't live in 100% one way or another. That's not how human life and history works. But for the most part, these women were respectable. These were the wives of a lot of these soldiers who actually were allowed to travel with the armies because they could be quite useful. And so there are 3 main things that they were doing. Their 3 main tasks are laundry. They are also doing seamstressing work, making the shirts, and also doing repairs. And these women are also nursing the soldiers. These are nurses who are working in the hospitals. Now you've got the physicians and the surgeons' mates. They are doing the medical procedures. They are removing musket balls. They are stitching up wounds, all of that. But once they're done doing that, you need people there making sure that these guys are being given something to drink, that they're given the opportunity to eat, that there is someone cleaning up that hospital environment. And so this is where these women, these camp followers, were making sure that these guys who were injured, or even more likely ill, because illness was far more common than these battle injuries, they're the ones making sure that they have a chance. So we can't forget the ladies. Now, the types of materials that would be for these clothes, primarily linen, like that shirt I was just holding up, and a lot of wool. And I have some scraps of wool here. A lot of these soldiers, especially the militia soldiers, they are in civilian clothing. And so you've got a whole bunch of different colors. So you can't always just look at it of, oh, okay, they're wearing blue, they're the Americans. No, there's actually some of them wearing red, wearing green, all sorts of things, because it is their clothing from home. And as the war goes on, you definitely get a bit more conformity in uniforms and things like that, especially within the Continental Army. But again, the militia, you did see variation, especially early on. And we've got some early images here showing what some of the clothing would look like. And again, some of these early iterations of uniforms and such. We have an American soldier on that side, an American officer over here. Interestingly, these are dated to 1778, and these are images that have been done by a German. So it's interesting where some of these depictions come from. That amazing scene with the hill and Fraser's funeral and the river and the bridge of boats. Once again, that is a British rendering. So we have to make sure that we give credit where credit is due, because both sides were documenting what happened. And again, a few more views here. This is a 1781 depiction of the way some of the soldiers were dressed around the time of the surrender at Yorktown. And the things that they were carrying with them. Again, in addition to some spare shirts, you also want to make sure that you have a couple extra sets of wool stockings. And we also have here an example of a canteen. Often we might think of tin canteens, but at least amongst the Americans, particularly the militia, this, which is known as a cheese box canteen, was a very common way of carrying your water. And in my opinion, tastes a lot better than the tin too. It's been lined with brewer's pitch and or beeswax to make it at least a little bit more waterproof. But it definitely, you have to keep water in these or soak them for a bit before you want to use them to get the wood to swell up. Another important thing that they would be carrying is a sewing kit. But at the time, these were called a housewife, which in the documentary evidence and all like that leads to some confusion, especially for people who are just starting out, about carrying your housewife with you. Very necessary to repairing your clothing, a housewife. Yup, yeah, little sewing kit. And something to eat with, of course. Perhaps some coins to take with you to the sutlers or to trade with locals and everything. And again, we have some soap here. Again, people in the 18th century have kind of gotten a bad reputation of filth and no belief or concept of sanitation. Their view of it was just different than ours. There was the knowledge that a clean army is a healthy army, and a healthy army is a strong army. So again, laundering those shirts and making sure that there were opportunities to clean. And I also have a cartridge box here with some of the cartridges in it. And so these would be filled with black powder and also a musket ball These are not. These are blanks. So this would have been carried to essentially streamline the process of loading the musket. And so that is here as well. As I mentioned earlier when talking about our friend Benedict, I have a few musket balls up here of various caliber, and I also have a piece of grape shot. When we talk about the battles, we're often thinking about, what we often think about is just a hail of musket fire going back and forth, but there was artillery. And so there's full-on cannonballs, but you've also got these sort of miniature cannonballs that would be grouped together with sort of netting or in a canvas bag, and these would be shot out as well and would just spray across the battlefield. So again, all sorts of projectiles. You also had sabers and swords and all sorts of things like that. And what they did, a lot of drilling and practicing. In a lot of cases, you have farm boys. In a lot of cases, you have teenagers. And so you need to make sure that they are aware of how to use their musket, how to march in formation, how to understand and listen to orders. So there's a lot of that practice going on. And again, learning to fire. And there also is a lot of sitting around too. But as we talked about earlier, with Schuyler's strategy, they're often put to work, in Schuyler's case, closing the roads to slow down Burgoyne's army, but also sometimes they're building roads in preparation for the American army to come through, to be able to bring their wagons through and things like that. They're cutting firewood, so they might be digging and building different fortifications. All sorts of things like that, and that's something that the Americans were doing a lot of in the lead up to the battles right around Stillwater. So, and as I know, I'm watching the clock as well, don't worry. Ken Burns is waiting for you, I know. Just so you know, it does repeat at 10 o'clock. So if you miss the first 5-10 minutes, just hang on at the end of that episode and you'll be able to see what you might have missed. So. I do want to talk a little bit about what we have planned and what's coming up and what we've been working on. And things have been underway for a little while, starting around 2020, 2021. These plans were being put into place. And so we have the Saratoga County 250th Commission. And the goals of that are to educate, engage, and preserve. And we've been doing that in a variety of ways. You might have even seen us at the Saratoga County Fair. That is one of those examples of, if you've got a lot of people already coming to one place, well, go to where the people are. So we've been trying to promote at places like that. A lot of focus on the potential of heritage tourism. And earlier this year, we were very closely watching what was happening over in eastern Massachusetts with the 250th reenactments of Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Bunker Hill. And we saw that there was a major economic impact on the local businesses and the local economy for those events. So we've been working very closely with our local chambers of commerce to make sure that our region is ready and is ready to roll out the welcome mat and have a lot of people here. A lot of the historical interpreters and reenactors, but also a lot of interested people who live locally, but also will be traveling from afar to come here to be able to experience these events. Now, you don't have to wait long to experience the first local 250th event. In fact, less than a month from right now, on December 13th, we have Knox Fest. And I heard someone over here talking about the Knox markers and such, and the Knox Trail. Henry Knox, in the process of bringing 59 cannons from Fort Ticonderoga and Crown Point, came right through this area on his way out into Massachusetts to Dorchester Heights to relieve Boston and get the British out of there. So we are honoring Henry Knox through events here in Saratoga County on December 13th at Hudson Crossing. We're going to be receiving the Linstock, the ceremonial Linstock. We're kind of treating it like an Olympic torch. And because it's going to be up in Warren County on Friday night, Washington County on Saturday morning, to us on the afternoon of Saturday the 13th. And then we have Knox Fest over at Fort Hardy Park, right in the center of downtown Schuylerville. And that'll be from 1 to 4. And then at 7 o'clock in Mechanicville, we have an 18th century concert with the musicians of Malwick, interspersed with some different letters and correspondence relating to Henry Knox's journey through our area. So you can go to knox250.com for a lot more information on that, and there are some brochures over there related to that specifically. We do an annual symposium in early May with a lot of various featured speakers. It's a great chance to come and learn more. And then we have our Living History Weekend, usually Columbus Day weekend, and we're doing that over at Fort Hardy, over in Schuylerville, and some other sites in Stillwater and such like that. Great opportunity to come and experience certainly the military side of things with the militia, and then we've got the 24th Regiment of Foot, a British regiment that we work with, but also a lot of civilian demonstrations, blacksmith, shoemakers, all that sort of thing. And Surrender Day, we work with the local students at Schuylerville schools, and this past year also Salem, and they even do the drumming as part of their music class. They learn drum cadences. And yes, they work. And last but not least, save the date. So that Columbus Day weekend in 2027, we have very, very big plans. So definitely stay up to date with us at Saratoga250.com. This is also printed out over on that table as a little bit of a chance to learn more and expand your knowledge and see what we're doing. And here we are, Saratoga250.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and other social media. We have a YouTube channel, all sorts of things. So we are definitely excited about what we have coming up, and we encourage you to become involved. So thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Any questions? Yes. So the question was asking if I'm a reenactor myself, and yes, I am. If we actually go back a couple of shots here, I'm right here. I have been reenacting since I was about 13 years old. I started volunteering at Saratoga Battlefield as a Girl Scout, and I used to give tours of the Schuyler House as a teenager. And so I also hand stitch all of my own clothing for that. Not nearly as good as my friend is at stitching those things. But yes, I have been doing that for a very long time. And I usually actually do more of the British and the Loyalist side of things. But yes. Yes.
How did they get the men to come and swarm in that area? Was it conscription, or was it just aim, or how long did they have to stay when they did come?
So referring to around the time of the battles and how it's the numbers for the Americans started to exponentially increase. So there were a variety of things going on, but there was this knowledge that they needed people and they needed them quick. So there was a lot of militiamen coming in from New England. And it's interesting, especially for the first battle, you might expect that for the Americans there would be a ton of locals from Albany and Tryon County and all like that would be present and fighting at that first battle. But the reality, a lot of the guys were here from New England, Massachusetts and New Hampshire and all like that. And a lot of them were also on 3-month sort of spans of time. And so there was also a desire to make sure that they used them while they could, kind of thing, because sometimes it was hard to get the re-enlistments and all of that. Sometimes the pay was slow, food's not good, so again, sometimes it was a challenge to make sure that they had enough troops. But for that second battle in particular, and especially in the lead up to that surrender, it's amazing how the numbers ballooned. And by then, around the time of the surrender, you also have a lot of the locals starting to show up. The locals, the Albany guys and such, from what I've heard, a lot of them were actually stationed elsewhere, like up around Fort Edward area and staffing different outposts and things like that. But they started to bring them local as well for that, what ended up being the surrender.
From what I've read, there was a lot of agitation between Gates and Benedict Arnold. And,
Yes.
that's why Benedict, he took off and led the charge without Gates's
Yes.
information.
Yeah, and so there's some ways that some of that has been slightly overblown. They, by no means were they best friends. We can definitely say that. Some of the history, though, was not rewritten, but misunderstood in part through Wilkinson, who later was, in his own strategic way, not being entirely forthcoming. And he wrote a memoir, and they've actually found that there's a lot of things in that memoir that are not correct. And that altered the historical record. And now through other sources, historians are trying to figure out where Wilkinson was telling the truth, where he was stretching things somewhat. And one of the, in my opinion, best resources on this with some of the most up-to-date recent research. This is a book that was done by the military artist Don Troiani and Eric Schnitzer, who's the historian and one of the park rangers over at Saratoga National Historical Park. And one of Eric's major strengths is he's going back through everything with a fine-tooth comb and looking for places where the historical record and the documents maybe aren't agreeing, and has actually found a lot of uncovered a lot of new information. So if the Battles of Saratoga is an interest of yours, I highly, highly recommend this book, Don Troiani's Campaign to Saratoga, 1777. And this came out just a few years ago. I believe Barnes & Noble has it. Northshire Bookstore might have it in Saratoga Springs. But yeah, there's... I believe so, but I can't say for sure. Yep.
Ann, thank you very much. On behalf of all of us, what a wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I want to introduce Tom Halabuda. He's our Grand Knight of our Knights of Columbus group around here. Tom?
Hi, everybody. Just before we all leave, I want to personally thank John Woods for all that he has done for this program over the years, getting all these speakers. He even made me smarter, which is impressive, John. So thank you. He's not going away. He will still do the technical end of this, and Jim will do the scheduling and get the people. But hey, if we could just thank John. And if you watch this on YouTube, hey, you see John, thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.